A very good evening. After the wonderful mega event and the pediatric pulmonology webinars, the Chest Council of India, in association with Cipla Respiratory, brings to you yet another webinar on thoracic surgery. These webinars, as you know, are the brainchild of our founder president, Dr. N.H. Krishna. Today's webinar is based on the respiratory illnesses which require surgical interventions. And the speakers will be none other than our own CCI stars, Dr. Nasir Yusuf and Dr. Ravichandra JB. I take the privilege to introduce them to you, though they don't require any introduction as such. Dr. Nasir Yusuf is associated with Chest Hospital Calicut and Sunrise Hospital Kochi. He is the adjunct faculty at Manipal University. He had his early career at Manipal, then followed at UK and Canada, and subsequently in 1999 he was credited as doing the first CABG in the Malabar region. He has the distinction of having treated the youngest patient as young as 5 days and the oldest as old as 105 years. He also has a distinction of having removed the heaviest tumor from the chest, which he shared with us in the forums. His areas of interest are MDR-TB, bilateral bronchiectasis, cancer, and lung volume reduction surgery. He has a passion of training pulmonologists in the field of thoracoscopy. In fact, he was the first to successfully conduct the workshop on thoracoscopy live at Jodhpur NAPCON 2010. And he was the chairperson of the workshop committee at Cochin NAPCON 2019. He is the South Zone chair of the Thoracic Endoscopy Society, and he is the organizing secretary of BronchoCon 2021. We invite him to present on the surgery in lung cancer stage 4 in his own phenomenal style. The second speaker, Dr. Ravichandra, is associated with Sakara Hospitals, Bangalore. And incidentally, he is the CCI convener of Bangalore. He is a graduate of Bangalore Medical College and DNB from St. Martha's Hospital, MRCS from Edinburgh, and MCH from Gujarat University, Ahmedabad. He has worked in Sri Jayachandra Institute of Cardiovascular Science and Research and gained ample experience. His areas of interest is one of, apart from the cardiovascular, he is interested in thoracic surgeries also. And today he will be taking us to a journey of VATS, which is one of his areas of interest. So, without wasting time, let us join the speakers with their presentations. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Nasir Yusuf, cardiothoracic surgeon with interest in minimally invasive thoracic surgery. The topic, curative surgery in stage 4 lung cancer, would sound to most as impossible and to many as absurd. But I'm sure I've got you guessing, and let's look at the facts. Stage 4 lung cancer would mean that in this topic today would refer to non-small cell lung cancer and not to small cell lung cancers. And NSCLC accounts for 80% of lung cancers. Unfortunately, 50% may have already spread and are not amenable to curative treatment, with a survival time of a mere 7 or 11 months. And an abysmal low 10% survival rate at 5 years. The basis of treatment for lung cancers is surgery. That is the cornerstone. Stage 1, stage 2, treatment is surgery, plus or minus chemotherapy. But however, in stage 3, it's the other way around, chemotherapy, radiation, plus or minus surgery. However, in stage 4, there is no mention of surgery. When we look at the TNM classification, what is of interest to us is to focus on the metastasis. M1A deals with malignant pleural effusion or pericardial pleural effusion or separate nodules in the opposite lobe. M1B is single extrathoracic metastasis. The emphasis is single. M1C is of no interest to us because it's multiple extrathoracic metastasis. So M1 would be stage 4A, and the survival there is less than 10%. And all that we have to offer today is largely palliative therapy. In stage 4, there's nothing that can be done. That is a misnomer. Why is it so? Aggressive management of metastasis to the lung from non-lung histologies have been shown to improve outcomes. So the reverse, like the reverse lockdown, the reverse and the converse also may be true for metastasis from the primary lung cancer. Primary in the lung, or secondary in the liver, or elsewhere. The classic examples would be isolated brain or adrenal metastasis. How do we go about it? When we look at the statistics, after full evaluation, approximately 7% of patients with metastatic disease will have solitary metastasis. So that's a sizable amount. 7% are only left with solitary single metastasis. That would include adrenals, brain, liver, pancreas, or the small intestine, and ipsilateral or contralateral secondaries. The primary lung cancer can be resected with curative intent. A focused metastasectomy may be considered a reasonable option. And there's very good data in the setting of oligometastasis. Aggressive treatment for some stage 4 lung cancer patients can dramatically improve overall survival. Long-term outcomes of surgical resection for stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer, a national analysis. That is a National Cancer Database from the United States. How do they go about it? The management strategy would be single metastasis, primary in the lung, resect the lesion in the lung in combination with chemotherapy, either before or after lung resection. The point to be noted is, first, the metastasis is resected, then we go in for the lung after an interval. So in conclusion, they found excellent 5-year survival rates of 10 to 20% as opposed to a mere 5 to 10% with traditional chemoradiation. This paper, Resection of Oligometastatic Lung Cancer to the Pancreas, again substantiates and supports the view of a solitary metastasis in the pancreas and lung primary can be curatively treated. Now, types of lung resection we are looking at is a lobectomy would be the most ideal. However, depending on the comorbidities and the cardiopulmonary reserve, it may be only a wedge resection or a segmental resection. Neunectomy by far should be avoided because of its morbidity. If the lesion is confined to the upper lobe and invading into the endobronchial region, a sleeve lobectomy could be done, thereby saving the lower lobe. This is interesting. 48.5% 5-year survival in metastasectomy for synchronous solitary non-small cell lung cancer metastasis. Incredibly encouraging. Let's just run through a couple of cases. This is a patient, 84-year-old, who had metastasis in the liver and primary in the lung. A transarterial catheteral embolization of the liver lesion was done, followed within 2 months of resection of the lesion in the lung. This is quite exciting that this patient had a secondary in the adrenal and the primary in the lung. The adrenal was treated without any problem whatsoever. Unfortunately, he had a problem with the pneumonectomy with the dreaded complication of a bronchopleural fistula. This was done elsewhere, and that's the time when they came to us, and we did a procedure which is rather uncommon, is to split the sternum, open the pericardium, separate the superior vena cava and the pulmonary artery, go behind, split the posterior pericardium, and there's the trachea, and then divide and suture the left main bronchus. Let's go back to TNM and focus on T4. It is said tumor invading mediastinum, diaphragm, hard Grace vessels are not to be touched with a Botch boom. This particular patient, you can see that the mediastinal pleura is involved. It could be resected. Mesothelioma. This particular case shows a classical mesothelioma wherein the parietal pleura is involved as well as the diaphragm. And we have been told traditionally we are not supposed to take this patient for surgery, but we could effectively do a parietal pleurectomy as well as remove the diaphragmatic pleura. Aorta, not to be touched, but this particular view shows the tumor has involved the aorta. If this can be again scraped off or along with the adventitia. Inferior pulmonary vein involvement, again, is supposed to be a contraindication, but if we can open the pericardium, we can ligate and divide the inferior pulmonary vein within the pericardium. Off guideline optional. This is interesting in the sense that primary tumor resection showed survival benefits in NSCLC with unexpected malignant pleural effusion. So this was an incidental finding. Having gone in, they went in and took out the primary lesion and did a pleurectomy. This patient paper, surgery for metastatic pleural extension of NSCLC lung cancer. And what did they all find? If you look at overall number of pleural effusions, a small segment, but significant, 7.5% of NSCLC, localized, the lesion is localized in the chest, in the lung, and is resectable, along with a portion of the pleura. So patients underwent complete surgical resection of primary tumor and pleural nodules. 5-year survival rate was 16% and 21% if the resection was lobectomy, as opposed to 2.4% of 5-year survival. Pericardial effusion could be one of the other complications or metastasis. As you can see here, the heart is tense. You can't see it. You cannot imagine or visualize the heart beating. You're pushing it. There's, as if it's a virtual standstill. And we gave a nick. Oh my God, was it the aorta for a moment we thought, because it's pumping like a fountain, but that was happily only the pericardiotomy done. And now we can go further, and here you see there's associated pleural effusion. That could be easily tackled. And here's the pericardial effusion. We make a pericardiotomy at the just anterior to the phrenic nerve, and there we lift it up. There are no adhesions, free-flowing fluid, completely drained, and excise the pericardium. Deal with the primary lesion, knock off the pericardium, and there you are. It's a result of almost a cure. So, in stage 4, in a particular segment, there's not only hope, there's not only surgery and chemotherapy. There is hope in stage 4 lung cancer, and we all live in hope and hope to conquer it, just as we hope to conquer COVID. The heart may conceive, the head devise, the hand execute. The future is bright.
Like Nasir sir, the first question is, During your presentation, you said there is a question like, is it what the surgery you have described also known as palliative surgery? Am I audible?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
So your question, if I understand,
Yeah.
is that what is it? What is palliative surgery? Is that the question?
Is it the procedure what you have done also be called as palliative surgery? That is
No,
what the
no.
question is.
Okay, no, it's not. Basically, there'll be three types. One is a curative intent surgery. That's what we have discussed. Then there's palliative surgery, and then there's salvage resection. Now, in palliative surgery, it is not done with the intention of increasing the longevity. If there is a complication, for example, if there's an empyema, or there's a bronchopleural fistula, or a patient has hemoptysis, in an emergency situation, we go in to take care of the symptom, and that is to give relief. This is not that. This is to give, prolong the life, better quality of life, increase longevity. That is the idea of this surgery, known as with curative intent surgery, where normally, for example, in uh, the stage 1A we were discussing, where the longevity would be about 7 months, we can get up to 23, in 23%, you can get about 5 year survival. A solitary brain metastasis along with the primary in the lung. We take out the primary in the lung, take out the metastasis in the lung or in the brain or in the adrenal, the longevity thereby is increased. In the brain, if there is metastasis in the brain, or if the metastasis in the small intestine, it's preferable to deal with the metastasis first because of its potential complications and then go for the primary. Whereas in other cases, like in the liver or in the pancreas, we could deal with the primary first and then the secondary.
Right, sir. Like there is a case history here, sir, for Ravi Chandra. Like a 60-year-old smoker, there is a 3 centimeter lesion in the CT, right upper lobe. No metastasis. Is robotic VATS feasible? And how much would it cost in INR?
Okay. Then, sir, am I audible now?
Yeah.
Yes, sure. The question is like a 60-year-old male smoker with a right upper lobe lesion, which is 3 centimeters in size.
Yeah.
Yes, a solitary lesion with a situation like this, while after you assess the general condition of the patient, he is fit to undergo a minimally invasive surgery like a VATS. Yes, definitely either a robotic VATS or a regular multiportal VATS can be done for this. Okay. Coming to the cost about the robotic, I'm not very sure right now. Because here I would have to find out from the centers where they do the robotic surgeries. Nasir sir?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll take that question. Suppose
yes,
the robotic surgery is very fanciful, right? The number of incisions remain the same, but the cost is quite high. Depending upon the number of arms you use, say 25,000 is per arm, number of arms we use, the cost goes up. So in an Indian setting, it will cost about 2 to 3 times more than the VATS procedure. But maybe I'm biased, maybe Ravi is biased. It is not really that much of a difference. The advantage of Robo is that the fatigue factor is gone to a large extent, then the torque effect is not there. Torque is with the instrument sitting on the chest wall, there's a lot of manipulation done by the invats. Here, the joint is distal, so there is no torque effect. So the injury or damage to vessels is much lesser with Robo. But overall, the advantage over VATS, there is an advantage, but is it worth the cost? And is India can be afford because the investment is very high?
One more thing I would like to add, sir, is that in the robotic the recent consensus guidelines given by the ISMICS by going through the analysis, it says that the overall survival by robotic it is very small number to compare and say the overall survival by robotic is higher than either a multiportal or a uniportal VATS. It all depends on the convenience of the surgeon and the requirement by the patient. That's number one. The other thing is coming to the application of the staplers. In a robotic surgery, the staplers will be applied by the assistant and on the artery. So it all is depends on the technicality also, and how comfortable is the surgeon doing the VATS. When in some situations the surgeon may be more comfortable with a regular multiportal or uniportal VATS at the time of applying the vascular staplers, he may be more confident. Or again, it depends on the training given to the assistant who applies the staplers in case of a robotic VATS.
Okay, I take the next question. Like there is a question from asking, can a pulmonologist do VATS? Does he require some training, or the MD training itself is okay? Your take. Can a MD pulmonologist?
I mean, that's a very good question, a very debatable question. See, when you go in for a surgical procedure, as earlier pointed out by Dr. Ravi, that it's a therapeutic procedure. There could be bleeding. So one has to first to be a trained open surgeon. And then only can he go, and it takes years for us to go in and learn, first of all, an open procedure, and then further telescope it and translate it to VATS procedures. And mind you, the breathing, it's all major vessels are in the chest. As you've been taught in thoracoscopy, don't go near the heart, don't go near the aorta, not the blood vessels, stick to the pleura, not even touch the lung. So you need training, and that training takes years, my dear friend, not a few months. So a surgeon is allotted to do his work. A pulmonologist has his own area of specialization, an interventional pulmonologist is as well. So I think it's not so easy for a pulmonologist, even for an interventional pulmonologist, to suddenly overnight become a VATS surgeon.
I think the role of this is more of a complementary role where the thoracoscopy, the VATS procedure, they're complementary to each other. And as you said, Nasir sir, to do a VATS procedure, definitely you need to have got adequate training in your surgical techniques, as well as you should be able to tackle in case of an emergency. You should be well versed with the thoracotomy procedure, the open procedures. Yes.
Like we can't escape a question on corona. So how is the lung surgery being affected by corona epidemic? This is a question from our Dr. Tony.
Hello, Tony. Tony has done a lot of work on this. He's very active in the group. Now, what we employ, our procedure, our approach has evolved over the last 6 weeks. Initially, we were afraid to touch. Then, as far as possible, only do dire emergencies. At that point of time, all had been taking chloroquine, that we were wearing PPEs and doing it. And of course, the risk is greater, especially if the lung is open. The risk to us is, for a thoracic surgeon, is quite high. Even the anesthetist is at a risk. So what we normally do now is check for a COVID test. If it's negative, take the normal precautions like what we do for HIV or HPAC-AG patients, but we don't use PPE anymore. And that's my take on the matter, but I'm sure everybody has a different opinion. Each institution has developed its own protocol. So we double mask, double glove, use a visor. The only difference is we don't put that heavy suit because it could take 3-4 hours, 6 hours, and the heat is quite high. So that is how we proceed. No white PPE suit, the rest is the same.
Okay, sir. Here is a question from our Vijay Kumar Chennam Chetty, especially to Nasir sir. We read sleeve resection in textbook. If a carcinoid involving right intermediate bronchus and infiltrating the right middle lobe bronchus, is it feasible to consider sleeve and middle lobectomy?
The simple answer to that question, Vijay. Hi, Vijay. All things in Hyderabad. I hope you're okay and safe. Yes, sleeve lobectomy would be the choice because you can save the distal lower lobe, and I mean, it's not too difficult. It depends upon how much of the endobronchus is involved. If it's less than about 50 to 60%, and the root is in the middle lobe bronchus, it can be done. It should be done.
Okay, he continues to ask to us to put some light on tubeless VATS. Ravi?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Sure, sir. Tubeless VATS is a kind of a futuristic thing where you have to where you don't use any patient just under sedation. You do and finish it off without keeping any ICDs. Well, some part of it, yes, you will be, but at the same time, you have to keep in mind the safety of the patient and the monitoring. So that is most important. Probably it will take some more time for it to be in vogue. Tubeless VATS, I think so. The other things you can take, like, okay, without a Foley's or some kind of a short procedure probably can be done without intubation. But considering the safety and the possibility of early postoperative recovery and all those things, you probably would not like to avoid an ET tube. And yes, in a malignancy setup, people have been doing closing without keeping the ICDs. So that can be done. Partly it can be implemented right way.
Okay.
Nasir, sir?
Yeah, quite right, quite right. It's again, it depends upon the operator.
So, a soft tissue mass with calcification at the apical segment in CT, will VATS be useful in such situation? The soft tissue mass with calcification at the apical segment in CT, will VATS be useful in this situation?
I mean, yes, sir. Depending on the size of the mass, definitely you can go ahead with the resection. Considering all the other general situation, if the other things are same, yes, I think you should consider a VATS surgery for this patient.
Sir, another question for Nasir sir. The results of total surgeries you have done till now and the percentage 5-year survival.
Oh, that's a very good question, very lengthy question to answer. I'm not sure what the stage they're talking about. Is stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3, stage 4, or pertaining to the talk today? If it is pertaining to the talk today of stage 4A surgery, I have to admit, world over, and we too, over, I'm talking about a year, we started operating on stage 4 patients for the last 5 to 7 years. And why I'm so clear, because just, you won't believe it, yesterday a patient of mine with whom we had done a similar case with brain mets survived for 5 years, and unfortunately 2 weeks back was admitted with SPITS in the ICU. So the last 7 years, we have been doing this with very encouraging results, especially with solitary metastasis, excellent results. You're getting good 5-year survival rates, albeit numbers are slow. And what is most encouraging is with malignant pleural effusion, where the lesion is localized and the medial external pleura is not extensively involved. Neither do we have much nodules on the diaphragm. A pleurectomy combined with it gives us excellent results. And I think it should always be considered before. So it could be a large malignant pleural effusion with few nodules. And I think a pleurectomy is warranted if the local lesion can also be taken out with no metastasis and preferably no involvement of the nodes on the same side or on the contralateral sides. So stage 1, Stage 4A, I'm a strong believer in these instances where the metastasis is solitary, either to the brain, adrenal, pancreas, or liver. The results are very encouraging, including the small intestine. Bone, no.
If the indication is lung cancer, or for that matter, the person is asking about it could be mesothelioma also. When a part is resected, don't you think it can infiltrate the port? The port getting infiltrated
Yes,
by the tumor.
absolutely. Yes. So before the resection, you need to plan the resection, and we have to take all precautions to try to avoid any port site implantation or spillage of the any tumor cells or part of the tumor into the pleural cavity, and that and you can prevent port site infiltration. I mean, port site implantation of the tumor. So delivery of the tumor also, once it is resected, before resection, you need to plan and take out a adequate margin so that you do not leave any residual tumor at the site of the primary, at the site of the lesion. That is one. And the other thing is, be very careful when you take the tumor and delivery of the tumor. Before that, you need to put it into an endo bag, and it has to be of an adequate and without much manipulation of the tumor at the time of delivery. Also, the other thing is, always under vision, you need to deliver the tumor from the thoracic cavity. The camera goes to the other port, and from then you try and divide, and always keep an eye on the tumor until it comes out.
Okay. What about closed pleural biopsy and yield of diagnostic versus thoracoscopy? This is a question from Kunal.
Yeah, I have a very strong.
Then, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for passing on that question to me, Ravi. I've had these debates at the national level. I personally feel a closed pleural biopsy procedure with the Abraham's needle is a very good procedure. Involves very little morbidity, not much of it. It's a day procedure and extremely good in the remote setting, and more so in India, where we have a high percentage of tubercular pleural effusions with an yield of 76%. I know there are proponents who are against this and they say, no, it should be a thoracoscopic procedure. But even as lately as last week, there was a debate on one of these groups. And I was quite clear in my mind, we should not forget these time-old procedures, which are very good, and not give way to all these modern technologies and trying to influence us, bombard us, pressurize us to using these procedures. So, excellent question, Kunal. When you suspect tubercular pleural effusion, please go ahead and do a pleural biopsy. And anyone listening who doesn't have a thoracoscope, please try a pleural biopsy with a closed procedure. Even in malignancy, you can get up to 25 to 30% possibility. However, please remember, if you don't have a proper diagnosis, nothing is confirmed, then of course you need to go in for thoracoscopic procedure.
Now that the word of Abraham's needle has come, what about the Koop's needle, sir?
Very good. I'll leave that to the operator.
It depends on personal experiences. Okay, fine. There is a question like, how do you manage ICD drains in a COVID patient? Again, I think it's a general, all the aerosol precautions has to be taken. Whatever, because pleural fluid also can
it can have, yes, sir. Yes. So, some of the studies have shown that the virus, they have isolated from the pleural fluid as well as the peritoneal fluid. But I think the numbers are less, and even in the GI tract fluid and those things, some specimen they have yielded from the feces as well. But overall consensus is that any AGPs like aerosol generating procedures have got a very, very high risk of passing on the viral particles to the operator. That is the situation where you'll have to be very, very careful. And coming to the management of ICDs, intercostal drains, yes, there is a chance of those virus particles being in the in the pleural fluid, in the drainage fluid. At the same time, you'll have to take all the sterile precautions when you are handling either the ICD bottle or the ICD site, changing of the dressing, and by frequent milking of the tube, probably the need to intervene. Any frequency of the need to intervene will be very, very minimal.
Right, sir. Somebody is asking about what is difference between a medical thoracoscopy and surgical thoracoscopy?
Yes, sir. Medical thoracoscopy is basically the type is that it is done in a endoscopy suite, either under local anesthesia or conscious sedation. That is a procedure. Whereas for a VATS procedure, you need to do with anesthesia. The anesthetist will have to be there. Of course, the other situation also anesthesia will be there for a backup. But in a VATS procedure, it will be a full general anesthesia. It will be like either the anesthesia will be like either a laparotomy, thoracotomy, or a sternotomy, any of these, but a full general anesthesia, a complete one will be done. Whereas a medical thoracoscopy, overview is that it's a short procedure. So either you can do with a local anesthesia, local infiltration, probably some kind of regional anesthesia can be added along with some IV sedation. With that you can do. That is one thing. The other thing is the amount of invasion. In a medical thoracoscopy, either a single port, a small size of the port can be used. Some people also use two ports. One of them for camera, the other one is a working port. Whereas for a VATS, most often you do with a 3-port, separate ports, or a little larger uniport, which will suffice to pass your 2 or 3 long shafted instruments. You will have to pass in the camera, the working, you'll have to use the same thing as a working channel along with the option for some suctioning also. And the other thing is one of the ports size will have to be quite adequate so that in case there is a need arises, you should be able to pass on a sponge on a stick inside. So always keep a sponge on a stick handy along with the VATS trolley, so that in case of anything. The other thing is everything in the VATS procedure is magnified. So any moment you feel like you'll have to control the bleeding inside or some kind of manipulation, should be ready for that. And the setup also will be a full operation theater setup. You cannot do a VATS procedure in an endoscopy suite.
Now, here is an interesting question. How long anticoagulant should be withheld before the procedure?
Yes, before any VATS procedure, considering the situation of the patient, you will have to do a bleeding profile, which is very important. Earlier, bleeding test and clotting time were being done. Now you can do a PT and APTT. Going by that, you will have to wait. How long do you wait? That's a different question. I mean, usually when a patient is on either a heparin or low molecular weight heparin, like a Clexane or something like that, probably waiting for 2 days, 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours should be adequate, right? Having said that, you'll also have to look into the LFTs. If there is any clinical warranty which you might think that there could be a liver function derangement, probably you'll have to wait, repeat the test the day in the morning, and see if the parameters are okay, you can go ahead. Or if we are not happy, you'll have to probably wait for another day and then take her for the VATS procedure. That's one thing. The other thing is, to do a VATS procedure, I think preoperative planning and adequacy of the patient being fit for this particular procedure is quite important. Once you've decided to go ahead with a VATS procedure, and if there is any bleeding tendency or something like that, which could have avoided, that should be avoided, or it should be, delayed, and all the factors have to be corrected, and probably then you can go ahead with the VATS procedure.
So, how do we approach for BPF closure in a MDR TB patient with empyema? Nasir sir?
Dr. Dayanand, I'm very happy to take that question. But today we are talking about lung cancers. But
we should discuss about TB also.
I'll take that question, no problem. MDR TB is always a challenge. And see, sometimes in MDR TB, we have to go in as an emergency. This is probably an emergency. The BPF is not healing, got adequate amount of drugs, must be on MDR. We know the patient is having multi-drug resistance and is already on drugs. Now trying to escalate the drugs may not help. We need to go in and we need to fix it. Importantly is to have a complete investigation, a thorough CT scan. And if the lesion is localized, if you can do a lobectomy or a segmentectomy, depending again on the cardiopulmonary reserve and the FEV1 and DLC, preferably to remove that segment. If it is an isolated, solitary segment, it's not that the whole lung is involved, then of course not. Various devices to close it. Unfortunately, these devices are not available in the country today. But there are people, smart guys, quite a few smart guys in the country, use spigots. You could trying to close these BPFs. So definitely it is coming of age. And if that can be done, it's going to be a huge relief for especially compromised patients who have poor pulmonary function tests. So I think that's a road ahead. And the only disadvantage as of now, which happens in the US with these devices, is can get dislodged. And sometimes they have to put multiple. And one thing which I have found is that once you put the device, it doesn't go that distal. While when we close the BPF by surgery, it's done from outside. It's on the visceral pleural area. Here, proximally, good lung could be lost. So, but anyway, patients who have poor pulmonary reserve, to tide over this complication, we could definitely use a rigid bronchoscopy and interventional pulmonology and devices to close the BPF. Good question.
Sir, when should an interventional pulmonologist refer to thoracic surgeon related to the main course of interventions?
My dear friend, who's put that question?
It is our president.
Oh, Dr. Krishna. Dr. Krishna, there's a huge overlap. Thank you for a very challenging question, controversial question. Plenty of debates happen at the national level, and often good friends of mine and I tend to disagree, but at the end of the debate, both of us stand up and hold our hands as if both of us have won. There are no winners here. It depends again on the competence of the interventional pulmonologist. How much, how far, how much, and until when. If there is a slight, it's better to be safe than sorry, is our take as surgeons. When we operate, we do extra complicated cases. But it's better to have a patient come out alive than have an operation successful, but a patient, dash. So if the conflict cannot be managed even by a surgeon, or a surgeon may not be available, he could be operating in the other theater, he may be in the same hospital. So one should be very, very sure of how much I can go far with this, say, debulking of a tumor, how much, and do I have a surgeon to back up, and will the surgeon back me up? Because some surgeons are unwilling, very reluctant to wash clean complications developed elsewhere, because the results could be bad. So you have to have a good surgeon who's willing to support you, and then you could go ahead and do these procedures.
Ravichandra, there is a question like your comments on thymectomy through VATS. But I would extend it like, is VATS only for thoracic surgery? Like even for esophagus also, I think they use VATS procedure limited.
Very true. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I would like, yes, I'm very happy to answer this question. In my talk, I've focused, I have rather stressed upon the pulmonary conditions for a VATS. But definitely, yes, the indications for VATS are much more than a thoracotomy. Or it can avoid either a thoracotomy, a laparotomy, or a sternotomy. All these conditions, many conditions which require any of these approaches can be safely and effectively tackled by a VATS procedure. VATS thymectomy is a very, with just small 3 ports there, the patient walks away the next day without the symptoms and without any large scar on the chest. On the other hand, the other way to approach a thymectomy would be by doing a sternotomy. So you will totally avoid a sternotomy. Of course, you'll have to keep a standby if there is a need which can arise at the time of, or during the surgery. You should always be ready to do a sternotomy. But believe me, more than 99% of the times, you will get away with a VATS thymectomy. The important thing is how you go around the vessels. The innominate vein will be sitting there, the phrenic will be there on the side, the SPC. So you should be, of course, very careful going to the pedicle of the thymus. Once you have done initial dissection from the anterior chest wall and then tackle these vessels, and once the pedicle has been done, you should be safely, you should be able to deliver the specimen. Yes. So it is quite effective to do a VATS thymectomy. We've been doing it routinely. So it's a very good surgery for a thymectomy. The thymic cysts or thymomas, or even for a myasthenia gravis thymectomies, all these are can be addressed by a VATS procedure. Number one. The other thing is an esophagus one. So yes, definitely the esophageal diverticulum, all these things, even though the numbers are less, they can be effectively tackled by a VATS procedure. Yes.
Okay. Nasser sir, stage 4, we get even malignant pleural effusions. There's a question on it. How do we proceed in with massive malignant pleural effusion also? Any role of surgery there?
A very good question, a very keen observation. We need to know if, number one, is the lesion in stage 4A, number one, if the effusion is not very massive, even if it's massive, if the pleural involvement is minimal and the lesion in the lung is solitary, why not? Why not take out the lesion, do a lobectomy or segmentectomy and do a pleurectomy? Pleurectomy is a standard procedure. Why just leave it because it's stage 4 alone? And how did we reach this? Many a time we have gone in as an emergency and had to do, as I'd shown earlier, in a malignant pleural pericardial effusion, you go in and drain it, and suddenly we find that we can take out the pericardium. Similarly, we go in and find, we put a thoracoscope and find that there aren't many nodules, drain the fluid, lung is coming up, there's a lesion in the superior segment or in the anterior segment of the upper lobe, resect that lesion, do a pleurectomy, lung expands, and you're going to increase the survival rate from a few 7 to 8 months to about 2 to 3 years, 24 to 36 months. But remember, of all the patients who have presented with metastasis, they found about 7.5% only eligible for the surgery. But even 7.5% is significant. The patient doesn't know who comes. Is he going to be in the 7.5% or in the 93%? If he is in the 7.5%, he's blessed. Why don't we give him a chance? So I feel, on the other hand, if you put it's a massive effusion, lung is not expanding, then you have to do a tunnel pleural catheter. However, the nodules are extensive, patient is in a debilitated condition, then TALC is excellent if the lung expands. The lung has to expand, drained the fluid and picked out excellent results. The only thing what needs there to be done is a proper portage along with there should be no adhesions, lung should be free, and the lung expands, bingo, the pleural effusion is gone. But again, median survival time is not going to significantly improve. Quality improves, but median survival time and longevity with 5-year survival rates are better, definitely better if you can remove the local lesion in the lung along with do a pleurectomy and the pleural effusions dealt with. Again, that's about 7 to 7.5%, but you'll definitely give them a better quality of life, better chance.
Right, sir. There is a case history given, like this is a patient of CABG, post CABG. There is a 10 centimeter lesion in the right pleura with effusion, and in a patient of post CABG. So, can we attempt a pleural biopsy, Ravi?
Yes, sir. The post there's a 10 centimeter lesion in the right side, right?
Right side pleura.
With in a post CABG, probably a biopsy for this for just a diagnostic purpose, probably a CT guided biopsy may be a better option for this, because with so many advancement, you can even very precisely localize the needle and get away with a just a needle prick to get the sample for the biopsy. Probably and nowadays, you know, with the CT interventional radiologists, they are able to access lesion almost very close to the main vessels. So even if it is quite medial, very close to the PA or somewhere, or even a peripheral lesion, that is easier. So they'll be with a CT guided biopsy, probably you'll be able to get away and get a tissue diagnosis, and then you can plan your management accordingly.
Right. There is another interesting question, like, when will you say no to VATS and prefer the thoracotomy?
Yes, sir, absolutely. Definitely, there are certain situations where you will not be offering VATS straight away. The thoracotomy will be a better option. Those conditions are quite important. Is that if there is any severe bleeding tendency, or you're not very sure, in spite of all the things which are normal, there. If you anticipate any higher risk of bleeding, that is one thing. The other thing is the anatomy itself, which can preclude a VATS procedure. The extent of VATS which you can go into depends on your the experience and how much technically you'll be able to handle. That is one thing. So probably the bulectomies, the BLEPs, excision, and lobectomies, segmentectomies, these things. This you will have to go in an ascending order, and some lesions which are close to the mediastinum, large masses, lymph nodes there, probably depending on the technicality, you'll have to take a call whether you do a VATS or prefer a thoracotomy.
Sir, Nasir sir, there is an interesting question here. What are metachronous and synchronous metastasis of the lung?
Dr. Dayanand, thank you for that challenging question. This again comes in stage 4. It's all coming back to stage 4. So what is meant by synchronous is, synchronous, the word in English means at the same time, right? However, it's not so simple in medical terms. So synchronous would mean if a lesion, there's a primary in the lung, and there is a second lesion within 6 months, say in the same site or in the contralateral lung, and that is known as synchronous, and those can be easily dealt with and should be dealt with. Certain studies and certain surgeons believe that both should be considered as 2 different primaries. But if there are no other lesions in the elsewhere, one should deal with it and take it out as early as possible. If not in the same sitting, preferably within, say, maximum 6 weeks. Now, metachronous is anything which appears after six months. Again, that's a gray area. It's not 6 months, 180 days, 79 days in synchronous, 180 days it becomes metachronous, but largely beyond 6 months because prognosis is different. In synchronous, they have got excellent results of up to 48% 5-year survival rates, while metachronous, it comes to around 23 to 26%. So that's why I think they probably distinctly differentiated between metachronous and synchronous.
Right, sir. Excellent. Then there is somebody asking about what are your comments on mitral valve repair through VATS?
Yes, absolutely. Mitral valve repair, to do a mitral valve repair, you need to go under a cardiopulmonary bypass. So yes, we have been doing mitral valve repairs and replacements by minimally invasive surgery. It's quite possible, and you will get excellent results for addressing the mitral valve by a mini thoracotomy. We use a mini thoracotomy like something like a uniportal VATS. You go through the right side, and then you'll have to do a percutaneous cannulation. SVC, IVC separate cannulation and use a CPP, and we can address the mitral valve from the right side. Yes, we have done quite a few mitral valve repairs by this approach, and the results are quite good.
Right, sir. There is a question about pseudo tumor, sir.
That's interesting. Pseudotumors of the lung, I hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, we are talking about lung.
Yes, because pseudotumors are largely elsewhere, very rarely in the lung. In all my years, I've seen only about, in my limited year experience, I've only seen 2 cases. And that is diagnosed post-operatively, default, when you say there's nothing else you can get. But it's a very rare tumor, very difficult tumor to diagnose. When you have no diagnosis, because it has, and pathologically, probably it is called both mesenchymal cells and inflammatory cells. So these lesions do not respond to any kind of treatment, then we go in and take it out. And even when we take it out, we are not sure it is actually going to go malignant, or is it going to just remain as a benign lesion. So these need to be followed up. Sadly, a large majority of them recur again. So it's basically they're to be treated as benign lesion or malignant lesion. But however, the bottom line would be that once we suspect a non-resolving lesion, whatever it is, go in and take it out, maybe a pseudotumor, and if the pathologists do not have a consensus, treat it as a pseudotumor which can become malignant, keep them on follow-up.
Like Ravichandra, there is a question like, at what pulmonary artery pressures and above will you take the patient for lobectomy? Or probably Nasir sir can also put in a word. At what?
By access?
They have not actually clarified about it. I think it is VATS only.
When you do a preoperative evaluation, if you find that the PA pressures are high, then you'll have to be cautious to offer a VATS procedure for a lobectomy, which involves ligation of the artery. The other procedures, if it is any other procedure like either a decortication or dealing with periphery of the lung, probably it's okay. But when you're addressing the artery, you'll have to be cautious and probably go ahead with a thoracotomy rather than a VATS procedure if it is more than, say, like 35 to 40. Up to 20 to 25 should be okay. But between 25 to 40, again, you'll have to take a call whether you will have to do a VATS or a thoracotomy. But something more than a 40, probably a thoracotomy is a safer procedure. Not that you cannot do a VATS procedure, but considering the safety and early completion of the procedure, probably a thoracotomy is a better option. I feel so. Nasir sir, your comments on that, please.
Totally agree with you, Ravi. Totally.
Thank you.
Anything above 40, be wary about it. And we see largely these patients with COPD. That's where we run into trouble. Yeah, sorry, Dr. Dayanand.
No problem, sir. Actually, there is a question like intraoperatively carbon dioxide. What is the role?
Yes. Can I take this question, sir?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, for a VATS procedure, you use a CO2. Of course, in a thoracotomy, there is no role for a CO2 insufflation. Intraoperatively, for a VATS procedure, you can use thoracotomy. You can use the CO2 if the lung is not adequately collapsing. The often it can be used it can be safely used in non-pulmonary procedures like a thymectomy, thymic cyst, or any other condition which does not involve the lung. When it comes to lung, if you use the CO2, the challenge is CO2 buildup, and it can reflect in your blood gases. But if you are within the safe thing, well within your limits, you can use the CO2 insufflation intraoperatively for a VATS procedure, even for pulmonary resections also, or a decortication and things like that. Important thing is you'll have to keep a watch on the pressures and repeated ABGs, and we can even use intermittent CO2 insufflation when you are not able to see properly, then you can use the CO2 insufflation, and then once it is okay, you can cut off the CO2, thereby trying to find a balance between the two. So using the CO2 the study at best, and it will improve the visualization. At that same time, we'll have to keep a close watch on the CO2s. The anesthetist will be able to tell us, when we can stop the CO2 insufflation, and then we can use one extra retractor and try to complete it. Yes.
Any absolute contraindications for VATS?
Absolute contraindication is one is any patient who is really unstable, the patient in shock, hypotension. These things are, because VATS it's not an emergency kind of a situation. If in any emergency, you will not be able to offer a VATS. For that matter, any minimally invasive surgery, you will not be able to offer in a patient who is really unstable. At that time, safety of the patient considering that, you'll have to do open surgery where you have a better access, and you'll be able to complete it quite safely and effectively and within a shorter period of time. That is one thing. The other thing is, severe bleeding tendency, general condition of the patient. If it is if there is a chance of a severe bleeding or something like that, probably you'll not be able to offer a VATS procedure to them. You will have to go ahead with a thoracotomy. Yes, sir.
Can I add on to that, Dr. Dayanand?
Please.
Yes, this is a very debatable situation, because when we talk about VATS, it's all most of the literature is from the West. While in India, we have a different scenario. That's where we have a lot of disagreement with my colleagues in the West, is we have inflammatory lesions, infection and inflammation is very much higher. So if the lung is badly stuck, adherent, tuberculosis, I would definitely not even consider going in and doing a VATS, number one. Number two, so our patients are totally different from what we have in the West, which they don't have. When they come and operate on Indian patients in India, then they realize, oh my God, how do you guys do it? Forget VATS, open procedures. Second, and then there's of course bleeding when it's stuck. And when in VATS you try to release adhesions, there are smart guys who do it. You could land up with a lot of air leak.
Right.
And further, if the pulmonary reserve is poor, you cannot use a double lung tube, because you're then working only on one lung. So when you do an open procedure, those patients it's not, for VATS you need a one lung anesthesia. That means the patient's breathing on one lung, but the pulmonary function is so poor that he cannot tolerate it. Then we need to do is that we ventilate both lungs and do the procedure. So where the pulmonary function and reserve is very poor, not tolerable or tolerant to single lung ventilation, again, that's a contraindication for VATS. So, but very well said, Dr. Dayanand, your points are very well taken.
Yes, sir. One more thing I would like to add is the development of the fissure. In many of the Western, the other countries, we find that the fissure is complete and it's quite easy to. That's what the literature says. It's easier to do the completion of the surgery in Western population, whereas in Indian subcontinent, you will need more time to develop the fissure, and probably there will be some anatomical variations. So you'll have to be very careful while offering the VATS procedure.
Like there is a question here, like role of tositomide in stage 4. I think it's related to medical this thing,
Medical oncology.
oncology.
We leave it to the medical oncologist to give his expert opinion.
Okay, we take up the next question, sir. Like generally, it is from my side, like you have a case of bilateral bronchiectasis and you take up for surgery and you find his PFT very poor. That means that his disease is bilateral and his lung functions are not optimal. So can we take him up for surgery in spite of his poor lung function, like based on the PFT only, or for that matter, a tumor lung? Because that tumor is also not participating in the lung function. So that is why you are getting the low volumes. So after surgery also it will be the same. Is it not a concept?
No,
Like
come
this is
again.
my query.
Are we talking of tumor and bronchiectasis or?
No, sir. Different. Let it be a tumor.
Right.
And we are resecting it. We have done the pulmonary function test and we get certain low volumes. Like, and we are in the tendency that we calculate the post-operative expected FEV1. It definitely comes lower than what we have recorded. So my question is, the part of the lung is already not participating in the respiratory physiology. So do we consider that also, or we have to go by the order of this thing, like calculating on the low voice?
Excellent question. I'm sorry, I repeat, excellent question. A very thoughtful question. Well thought out, that question is. Now we have options in this case. One is, was the patient, is he compliant? Has he done his pulmonary function test properly? Has he cooperated? That's number one. Suppose he's done so, I would very much believe in the climbing of stairs, maybe old fashioned, right?
Yeah.
If he can do 22 meters, I think that's a better indicator. He fails that and he has a lesion. What do we do? Ideally, a lobectomy is what is required. So that in a lobectomy, with a 5 centimeter lesion or less, what happens is good lung is lost. So his pulmonary reserve is further compromised. Then, yet he has no metastasis. He's supposed to be in stage 1 or 2. And you're here sitting here, what to do? What we have is segmentectomy, or you could do a wedge resection. But my dear friend, I would try my maximum to at least take that tumor out. May not be the ideal lobectomy, but at least take that lesion out, because if you remove only the pathology, that is not going to make his lung function worse, but surely his longevity is going to come down if you don't do that.
Yes, sir, absolutely agree.
Sir, there is an interesting question, sir. When will you not consider the surgical option for stage 4? Like give up the surgical option for stage 4? Any particular condition? Like
largely, all guidelines say stage 4, stage 1, 2 surgery,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And adjuvant chemotherapy. Stage 3, chemotherapy plus or minus surgery. Stage 4, no surgery. So we are here looking at certain indications where we can help the patient. And the reason for this, and we are only looking at M1A, effusion, malignant, pleural or pericardial, and we are looking at solitary extrathoracic metastasis, single metastasis.
Single mass.
Right, you have and one primary in the lung, which is resectable, then only those patients we are looking at. And but still, that's a sizable number, 7%,
7.5%.
7 to 8%. So if you can, those people will benefit. The rest is no touch. Then of course there are debatable areas like if the aorta is involved, inferior pulmonary vein is involved, but if they're not terribly infiltrated, we can deal with them. So it is on case basis. We have to individualize the treatment, customize the treatment as per the individual case. But largely, resectable lesion in the lung, solitary metastasis to the brain, solitary metastasis to the liver, adrenal, small intestine, go for it.
Right, sir. Another question here is any cutoff for platelet counts for VATS? Like the patient is incidentally having some mild thrombocytopenia or
Yes, yes. Yes, sir. Normal platelet count is 1.5 to 4.5 lakhs. So anything more than 1 lakh is agreeable. So that if you take the absolute count, it is okay if it is more than 1 lakh. But between 80 to 1 lakh is mild risk, but definitely less than 80,000, it's not a good option to offer a VATS procedure. In any surgical procedure, the risk of bleeding will be higher for a lower platelet count. And in that situation, offering if the surgery is required, offering a thoracotomy probably is a better option, so that you'll have a better control of bleeding. If at all any severe bleeding arises, but you can offer it better by a thoracotomy rather than a VATS procedure. If it is in the less than around 80,000.
now there is another question like I think we are exceeding the time. Anyway, I'll just take up this question like cause of pain in post-op period after VATS.
In the post-operative period, the pain could be either related to the incision, chest incision itself, or neurological pain. So you'll first thing is to prevent any kind of stretching of the hand, stretching of the axilla. So adequate padding is necessary, and you have to protect the brachial plexus and the axilla at the time of positioning of the patient. Other than that, in the post-operative, if you do a VATS procedure and after extubation with good physiotherapy, and once the patient is mobilized, the initial part of the period, if you manage the pain well, good analgesics, then within 24 hours, patient will be doing the spirometer and he will be ambulated. So after that, the pain gets better. So, and the other thing is with the VATS procedure, the requirement of epidural analgesia is quite less compared to thoracotomy. So, if you can manage, focus intensely on in the first 24 hours relief of pain, that is the best part. And after that, patient will be walking around on the first post-operative day.
Right, sir. I think I have taken most of the questions. I think we have exceeded the time also. So I think it is time for us to say goodbye till our next webinar. Bye.
Oh, may I thank
you.
Dr. Krishna, Dr. Pradeep Narayana, Vipul from Cipla, and Puneet, who was so good with the technique to help us with the technology. Dr. Dayanand, you were super, very cool, calm, and collected, and very thoughtful and insightful questions. And Ravi, you were brilliant, very coolly,
Thank you, sir.
Very objectively, you answered the questions. Thank you all. I enjoyed it very much. I hope all of you enjoyed it too.
I hope the audience must have enjoyed it.
Thank you, Dayanand sir, for hosting us. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, that was wonderful presentations. Thank you, Dr. Nasir Yusuf and Dr. Ravichandra, for enlightening us with your brilliant presentations and making us feel the complex subject very simple. Thank you once again for taking up the question answer session, which is very popular among the audience. Thank you, audience, for participating and posting the number of questions. Time is a constraint. We have to stop at some point. I again thank the speakers for sparing their time from their busy schedule for this webinar. I thank the Cipla Respiratory for the support they have rendered to us. Dr. N.H. Krishna, Dr. Narayana Pradipa, my friend Dr. Narendra, Dr. Vijay Kumar Chennamchetty, and R3. I thank you all for giving me the opportunity. It is time now to say goodbye. Goodbye till we meet next in the next webinar. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you. Good night.